Hello everybody, this is Tip Top MTG, and in today's video, we are going to be doing a continuation in my series I'm calling Magic the Marveling. So for those of you who don't know, it's essentially this giant series where I turn every single MCU movie and TV show into a custom set of Magic the Gathering cards. And this one is a little bit delayed, but I'm still hoping you guys are excited for it. Before we jump into this, just know there are going to be spoilers for Black Widow in this video, so just know that. Also know I'm not going to be talking about all of the cards I designed for this set, only about 10 to 15 of them. The rest are going to be able to be found in a link in the description down below. I just don't have time to talk about every common and interesting design that I came up with, and instead you guys can see those down there. Also, Loki will be coming up soon. The last episode of Loki and this movie came out very, very close together, and this movie technically came out before the end of Loki. So this one's coming first. Loki you can expect coming up very, very soon. Either way, if you guys haven't seen any of the other videos in my series, you don't need to. There will be a couple things that carry over. For instance, mechanics, tokens, some of those things that were designed for earlier movies sometimes show up later when they work for designs. The only thing you really need to know is that there are new creature types, one of which is hero, and another of which is villain. To save space on the type line, I've shortened it a little bit. And so essentially, if you see legendary hero dash a creature type, essentially that's the same thing as a legendary creature with the creature type of hero. It's not the most intuitive thing in the world, but I needed to save space on the type line for characters like Thor, who's an Asgardian god, noble, avenger hero. That's way too many creature types, and so that allows me to save some space there. So that's pretty much all you need to know. Either way, let's jump into this by talking about a new mechanic that is for this movie. In the past, each movie didn't have a new mechanic, but with, longer gaps between videos, it means I have a little bit more time to design, and so I've been trying to give each movie its own mechanic, but make it broad enough where it could theoretically go into another, series. For instance, Broadcast from WandaVision, or for instance, this one is going to be Infiltrate. So Infiltrate is essentially Infiltrate and then a mana cost, and when you pay that mana cost, it says target opponent gains control of this permanent. Only this permanent's owner may activate this ability. So, at face value, it is not a very good mechanic. Why would I want to give my opponent a creature that I have? Well, there are a couple reasons. There are oftentimes effects on the card. So for instance, let's read Killer Widow. 2/1 for 1, creature human spy. Whenever a creature you control with toughness 2 or less attacks, Killer Widow deals 2 damage to you. So essentially, if you are attacking with something, and it has 2 or less toughness, you're taking damage. So you might be fine with that. You might be fine that every time Killer Widow attacks, you're taking damage because it's a 2/1 for 1. However, you also might not be okay with that. So you could pay red and give your opponent Killer Widow. And now, whenever they attack with something with toughness 2 or less, they take damage as well, which means, if you give this to an opponent and they are playing a token deck, they can't just swing out at you with a bunch of 1/1s. They have to find a way to get rid of Killer Widow first. So that's kind of one incentive. The cards are all pretty much designed to be able to work on your side of the battlefield, but also be useful to give to your opponents. Another incentive for infiltrating is that some cards do say things like infiltrated creatures or infiltrating creatures get an effect or a bonus, or whenever you infiltrate, do this effect, essentially. And so those are a little bit of artificial reasons why you would want to activate Infiltrate. Generally, cards are designed that you want to activate it even if you have no other effects. So I tried to be very careful when designing the mechanic where that it didn't feel like you had to be playing an Infiltrate deck to enjoy the effects of a card. Either way, let's take a look at the main characters of the movie and talk about what effects they get, why they're flavorful, and all of that. The first one is Natasha, Escaped Widow. It's blue, red, white for a legendary hero human spy 2/2. So 2/2 for 3, and it can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater. So Natasha is pretty much always going to at least trade with an opponent, or with an opponent's creature. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, Natasha's owner draws a card and you lose a life, and then you can infiltrate for 1 black. So this is actually a 4-color commander if you were to run it as a commander, but essentially this is kind of encapsulating kind of everything the set is. It's going to be about infiltrating, And it's also going to be about hitting your opponent. I integrated themes of hitting your opponent because it made sense. Spies, assassins, rogues, all of those kind of characters are going to want to be hitting your opponent. You're sneaking in, getting the kill, sneaking in for some damage. I felt like it just made a perfect sense. So you'll notice that, Natasha and a lot of the characters in here are going to care about dealing combat damage to opponents, and then infiltrate as well. And so Natasha's able to do both. And you might be wondering, how did I carefully design this one for it? Well, you'll notice it says, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, Natasha's owner draws a card and you lose a life. So if you own this, you are just getting an effect every time you hit an opponent with a creature. That is really, really good. However, if an opponent controls this, whenever they deal combat damage to a player, you still draw the card and they get to lose the life. So you have less control over when you actually draw the card, but you don't have to pay the life part of it. And it almost disincentivizes your opponent from attacking because they're like, well, I could attack, but then I'm just giving them cards. So it's very much a political card in that aspect, but you could also just completely ignore the infiltrate part and just have this be a creature that's going to be able to get hit, or going to be able to draw you cards, is hard to block, and can do a bunch of stuff. So I felt like this perfectly encapsulates. She's going to go in, she's going to infiltrate the red room, because it kind of works both ways. They end up infiltrating the red room, and the people in the red room end up infiltrating world governments and things along those lines. So both sides are able to use the mechanic, and I just felt like this was a way for me to tie everything together on one card. But then we break down the rest of the, Romanov family. We have Elena, Freed Widow, 3 and a blue for legendary creature, human spy, 3/4. Whenever Elena deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So this one is going to be very similar to Natasha. Why? Because they grew up kind of together and until they got separated, but they're both trained by the Red Room. They're both going to have similar fighting tactics. I wanted them to have a little bit of similarity, Natasha is multicolored. The blue part of her is kind of the same part that Elena has. It's a little bit of a loose connection, but I did want it to be there. And then you have 2 and a blue. Target creature you control gains double strike until end of turn, which is typically not a blue effect. The next time that creature deals damage this turn, its power becomes 1. So yes, it is a little bit, you could say it's a little bit of a break for blue because blue doesn't get double strike. But what essentially this does in practice is you pay 3 mana, and when a creature attacks, essentially it's going to hit. So let's say it gives itself double strike. Hit for 3 damage, and then what's going to happen is because it dealt damage, it dealt damage to anything, whether it's a creature or whatever, it then swings again. So it is still a little bit of a bend because it is getting that first strike effect in blue, and I completely understand that, but I felt like it was still really interesting, and what that allows you to do is essentially get double on-hit triggers. So you can, if Elena attacks while Natasha's on the battlefield, Elena's drawing 4 cards with that effect. So it kind of doubles up those style of effects, and I thought that was a really interesting way to do that. You're kind of getting to exploit your opponent a little bit more, hit twice. Very cool. Next, we have Melina, Lead Widow, 3 and a black for a legendary creature, human spy scientist, 2/5 with death touch. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, Melina's owner creates a discovery token. Essentially, it's like a clue, but for scrying. That was introduced in Iron Man 2. And then while Melina is infiltrating, it loses death touch and gains. When this creature is put into the graveyard, put it onto the battlefield under its owner's control. And then you can infiltrate for 3 and a black. So essentially, this one is all about infiltrating. That's where Natasha gets her ability to infiltrate. So essentially, whenever you're dealing combat damage to a player, you're creating a discovery token. And again, that's just going to be the way it works. But if you give this to an opponent, it works very similar to how Natasha works in terms of you're hitting an opponent and you give it to an opponent, and whenever your opponent hits somebody, you're getting a benefit. Here's the thing about it. Melina takes it a little bit further. While Melina's infiltrating, it doesn't have death touch, which is good because you don't want to give your opponent a death touch creature. It's very hard to push quote unquote or attack into that. So it loses death touch and then also gets this effect where if your opponent does manage to get rid of Melina, you get Melina back and then can re-infiltrate it. So it's very hard for your opponent to just kill Melina while it's on their side of the board. So Melina's safer, not in your control. And that's due to, being able to kind of infiltrate a little bit better. I felt like that made a lot of sense. Then we have a Lexie Red Guardian, 3 red for a legendary creature, enhanced human, 5/3, and whenever it attacks, you may goad target creature, meaning it has to attack. He's, not gonna really think he just wants things to attack, which, by the way, means it's easier for you to swing in because they are tapping creatures to attack. Then you can pay a red and discard a card, and target human you control gets +2/+0 and gains trample until end of turn. This one is the loosest connection to Natasha, but it still is in that same realm of wanting to attack and wanting to hit your opponent. And you can kind of say the red contributes to that. But generally, this one is the loosest connection, but still, he's not a widow, so he doesn't have the benefit of hitting opponents and getting an effect off of it, but he still helps. And that's what I really wanted to show the distinction of, is that, the widows all have very, very similar text of whenever you're hitting an opponent, blah, 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 blah. Lexie doesn't do that, but it's still going to assist in getting that done. So I felt like it was an interesting thing where the cards could still work together, but still show a little bit of contrast. Either way, let's talk about the villain. We have Dreykov, 3 blue, black, red, for a 2/4, legendary villain, human rogue, and this one's a long one. Dreykov has hexproof as long as you control a creature you don't own. So it's very hard to target him as long as he kind of has his widows out in the world stopping things from happening. Creatures you control have haste and death touch. So that's kind of the benefit of Dreykov being on the battlefield, is that your creatures are going to swing fast and hit and be hard to block. At the beginning of your end step, sacrifice each other creature you control that didn't deal damage to an opponent, planeswalker an opponent controls, or a creature an opponent controls this turn. So essentially, at your end step, if a creature that isn't Dreykov didn't deal damage, you have to sacrifice it. And the reason, the logic behind it is you need your widows to be constantly out attacking, kind of in the world on duty almost. And if you don't, you get gotten rid of. And so yes, they have haste, so they're gonna enter the battlefield and they better be dealing damage. If your opponent has a way to stop it, it can end up in you losing your whole board. So your plan can explode in your face. But generally, you're gonna be constantly sending people out, and that's kind of where the power comes from. And it also allows for that hexproof to be a little more balanced, and same thing with the abilities above. But oftentimes you are gonna hit because things have death touch. People don't want to lose their creatures, so it's not that bad. And then you have 2 in a red, gain control of target creature with mana value 3 or less, untap it. If you control at least 6 creatures owned by the same opponent, sacrifice those creatures, you gain control of that opponent's next turn. So the idea here is you can steal something, and if you manage to keep it around, that's really awesome. You get, if you can get 6 creatures like that, then you can control their next turn and kill all 6 creatures. Otherwise, you could literally gain control of their creature and then decide, I don't want to attack or deal damage, and then boom, it gets sacrificed. So it is removal, but you can also decide to kind of keep your creatures around. And you might say, oh, gain control of it, and it's not until end of turn? That's a break for red. But you also have to realize they have to constantly be doing damage, or they might as well be dead. And so it pretty much, it is a little, again, a little bit of a bend, but it does still have that conditional. You can control that as long as it keeps dealing damage. And then if you can manage to keep enough of them dealing damage, you can gain control of an opponent's turn because you control enough of their organization, you could almost say. So a little bit of interesting, I think, card design where the card has a downside, but if you can manage to work through that downside, you get some very, very powerful effects. And I really wanted this to be a card that encompassed a lot of different aspects, and I feel like it's very lore accurate, you could say. And then we have Taskmaster, 4 a blue and a black. I didn't mark it as a villain. I went back and forth on this because was it really a villain? Was Taskmaster really a villain? I wasn't going to make that call and decided to do that just because it's marketed almost as a villain, and is in those colors. So 5/5 for 6. And it says it has flying as long as an opponent controls a creature with flying. The same is true for first strike, double strike, death touch, haste, hexproof, indestructible, lifelink, menace, protection, reach, trample, vigilance, and ward. So essentially, it gains each evergreen-ish keyword that your opponents have on their creatures. So that's to represent the fact that he is going, or I guess she is going to copy the stance and the moves of the opponent. And then whenever a creature dealt damage by Taskmaster this turn dies, Taskmaster gains all abilities of that creature. So if Task Manager manages to take down its prey, or its target, I should say, that probably makes a little bit more sense, Taskmaster gets stronger, learns from the experience, and now has more ability. So it's kind of an ability stealing creature. I felt like it was perfect. This templating has been used before, and I felt like it just perfectly encompassed Taskmaster. All right, next we have the Red Room. It's a legendary land. Red Room enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap to add black, and then you can pay 2 and tap and put a +1/+1 counter on target human. It gains this creature must attack each combat if able. Concept behind this, yes, they're making creatures, the humans, stronger, training them, but they also kind of take away their free will. They have to attack. Pretty basic. Wasn't super... It's not my favorite design in the set, but I do still feel like it's an important land that can be powerful in the right deck, like, you know, doing stuff that's interesting, but I just feel like it is something that needed to be talked about and needed a card in the set, and I felt like this encompassed it well without being wildly, like, overpowered. Next, we have Rick Mason, Widow's Ally. It is a white for a legendary creature, Human Advisor, and we're going to ignore all the kicker stuff, with the ability to tap and target creature gains protection from the creature or artifact type of your choice until end of turn. So not as powerful as a lot of protection, effects, but it will help with getting through against your opponent. For instance, if they have a bunch of humans, you can say, oh, well, now I have protection from humans, and so now only non-humans can block the creature, or it can help if your creature's about to die to certain effects. But it has kicker, so it's one white, and then if you include his normal cost, so essentially it's one white for kicker him, and when he enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, it gains tap, sacrifice any number of units, search your library for an artifact or enchantment with mana value X, reveal it, shuffle your library, then put that card on top of your library, X cards from the top. So, and that X is going to be something that didn't get written in the card. This actually is an exported version of X is the number of units. Don't know why that didn't get included on the text. That will hopefully be in the website version. That is in like the newest version in the card file. It must have just pulled an old one for the one we're looking at right now. But yeah, that'll be X, where X is the number of units. Essentially, it's kind of the idea of, if you give him time and money, he can actually get something, which is obviously a reference to what happens in the movie. He can go get something cheap for a cheap number of units, or go get something more expensive. And units are kind of like treasures that generate colorless mana. Unless you sacrifice 2 of them, then they get colored. So they're just worse treasures. And then lots of cards care about them. A little bit of a rough design. I don't want to say rough design. It's a little bit more of a rough fit to the character, but I still like how the design ended up. Then I have 2 cards that I just wanted to showcase because I really like them. 2 black for an instant unconscious killing. Destroy target creature. At the beginning of your upkeep, if unconscious killing is in your graveyard, flip a coin. If you win the flip, you cast a copy of unconscious killing that targets a creature chosen at random. Then exile it from your graveyard. And so I just really like it because it's like, I'm getting to kill something, and then I'm going to not have the free will to kill something. You might end up killing one of your opponent's stuff. You might actually end up killing one of your best friends, which actually kind of happens in the movie. So I really like how it is lore accurate and an interesting design. And then we have Copied Stance, 1 and a white instant. Target creature gains flying until end of turn as long as an opponent controls a creature with flying. So essentially this is Taskmaster's ability on an instant. And then it says if no abilities were granted this way, draw a card. I just really like this templating, and I tried to use it in a couple different cards to kind of have it be a reoccurring thing. Either way, guys, that is it for this video. If you want to check out more awesome cards featuring the Black Widow movie, or even just more cards from the MCU in general, there will be links for all of that in the description down below. Let me know if you guys enjoyed this video. Hit that like button to see more content like this. I know it's been a while since we've been able to do stuff like this, and it's been really, really fun. I will see you in the next one. Bye.